Welcome back from coffee. And Warren talked a lot about player choices and actions. And our next panel is going to dig into a topic that has that idea also at its heart, but in a different way. So we're going to talk with three great and interesting game designers who are working in the realm of strategy games. And we're going to talk about strategy games as a genre and as a design topic. So I'm joined today by Brad Muir and Soren Johnson and Keith Burgun, each one of which is going to do kind of a little mini presentation about their design philosophy when it comes to strategy games. And then we're going to have a little conversation about that, a little back and forth, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So why don't we start with Soren? If you want to lead us off. Soren is a person who's really made a name for himself in the realm of strategy games, having worked on Spore. Before that, was the lead designer on what many people consider to be the greatest version of the Civilization series, Civilization 4. Correct? Is that was yours? Sure. Yeah. So Civ 4. I think a lot of fans of that series, but especially of that version. So why don't you kick us off? Soren Johnson.
All right, thank you very much. It's great to be here. So these are the games that I've shipped in my career, and most notably probably Civ 4. I was lead designer, and I also wrote all of the game and AI code for that. And I just founded a new independent studio called Mohawk Games.
Woo! Yeah.
Thank you. We actually just announced last week, so I'm pretty excited about it. And I make strategy games. So let's talk about them. So this is how I would define strategy games. They have limited options. That means in Civ you have a city. You can build a spearman or an archer or his chariot, but you can't do all of them. You have to make some sort of specific choice where you're choosing one option and you're leaving the other ones behind. They have unexpected events. Often that means random events, random maps, hand of cards and magic, stuff like that. But even in games that have no luck, something like chess, you have unexpected events in terms of how your opponent is going to behave, what type of what choices they make. And then you have disparate outcomes. There's a winner, there's a loser, and beyond that, there's going to be different kinds of victory, different kinds of losses. You don't know when the game starts how it's going to end. It's just very different from these type of games. And I'm not sure if I could even make these type of games, and often I wonder if I'm even in the same industry, because the skills behind these types of games are very, very different from the skills that I have. These games are story-driven. They have authored levels, fixed progression. They're very different. And I should also very much specify that I'm not talking about budget here. I'm not just talking about AAA games. Small-scale indie games, fit into that. The same type of game as well. These games also are, fixed games, story-driven, authored levels, etc. So, what connects all of these games here? What is their defining characteristic? And what I would say is that, these games are static. I feel like that's the best way to describe them. Their world is authored. It's set in stone. Each player is going to be confronted with the same experience. And furthermore, they are meant to be finished, to be consumed. Now some of these, like Walking Dead, for example, gives you some real choices to make inside of that game world. But the outcomes of those choices were chosen exactly by the game's designers. They know what's going to happen when you choose to save character A versus character B. Strategy games, on the other hand, are dynamic. So what do I mean by dynamic? Well, the simplest way is this. These are a bunch of games that I would call very dynamic. They're unpredictable. They're rules driven. They're challenging. They're meant to be replayed. They are meant to be mastered. But I should like to point out that it's very much a continuum. It's very clear often when you have games that are on sort of one extreme or the other. But most games are somewhere in the middle. And furthermore, you'd say that there are some games which are at their core static, but they use dynamic systems so that they have stories, not the progression, but the dynamic game systems mean that the player's experience will be more varied. There's lots of different ways to approach these type of games. On the other hand, there are some dynamic games which use static content. These games are all highly replayable, but you make use of static content, like maps and tracks and so on. And of course, there's lots of room for debate here. Should Dragon Age be on the left and StarCraft be on the right? I mean, I could see someone making an argument that it should be switched. For single player at least, StarCraft 2 is a very static game. There is, mostly linear set of levels, which are, usually meant to be beaten in a very specific way. Dragon Age, on the other hand, changes a great deal depending upon, your chosen companions, your story choices, and your class skills. So there's lots of room for debate in the middle, but at the extremes, I think it's very clear that this is wrong. Civilization is not a static game. Last of Us is not a dynamic game. Thus, it's really important to understand the extremes. Every game is going to, most games are going to be some sort of mix of the two. So you need to understand, what's the key factors of the two ends of the continuum here. And this is how I would just define it. For static games, the content is primary. For dynamic games, the mechanics are primary. So strategy games are, of course, definitely dynamic. So you usually want to be thinking in terms of rules and mechanics when you're talking about strategy games. And if your mechanics are primary, then the key factor you want to think about is transparency. And what do I mean by that? Well, looking at the Civ series, they've had periods of good transparency and bad transparency. On the right, this is the combat system from Civ 5. And they did a really nice job of every time you decide to attack someone, it shows you directly, okay, this is the expected amount of damage that you're going to inflict. This is your strength, this is their strength, these are the modifiers that affect that. It gives you a very clear picture of what's going on inside the system. In Civ 1, there were, you had an attack number and you had a defense number, but it was really kind of a mystery what was going on inside the system. And oftentimes you got some very surprising results. You suddenly discovered you attacked a unit and you didn't realize there were a bunch of units beneath it, and suddenly you realized you actually destroyed 10 units at once, which was this incredible outcome, but you didn't necessarily understand that was what's going to happen. Here's another good example of bad transparency, good transparency at a global scale. On the left you have Sim Earth, which is a very complex game full of a lot of interrelated systems that were hard to describe, hard to understand. A lot of chaos theory going on, a lot of snowballing. Your game, there's possible. It was common, that the game would sort of spiral out of control, and you weren't really sure why that happened. On the right, you have DEF CON, a game that has really great transparency. This is nuclear warfare at a global scale, but you can tell that they included nothing graphically that wasn't necessary for the game. You have very spare coastlines to describe the world, and you just show the relevant things on the map for missile silos and the naval units and defenses and so on. And even look at the missiles there. As they move, you don't just see where they're going. You see the trails, so you see where they came from. That's a really great visual design. So now I want to talk about board games, or specifically how board games and video games are starting to meld, because I think that really makes clear the value of transparency. So here is an example of a pretty popular game that you would call a sort of a digital board game now, Card Hunter. But Card Hunter, of course, is basically a digital version of a pen and paper RPG. Here's Hearthstone from Blizzard, which is another sort of digital board game, but it of course is sort of a remaking of Magic. Here's a Battle of the Bulge, a great iPad strategy game by a veteran war game designer, and he's essentially remaking hex-based, counter-based war games that were very popular back in the 70s and 80s. So, are these games board games or are they video games? Because when people talk about them, they often describe them as if they are board games. But strictly speaking, they are clearly video games. They only exist in a digital format. And so, kind of the question is, usually when someone says board game, the assumption is that what defines that category is their physical components. What I would say is that, in fact, board games are defined by their transparency. That's the reason why when you look at something like Hearthstone and Battle of the Bulge, you immediately say, oh, well, that's like a board game, because it puts a priority on the transparency of the game rules. And so let me talk about some, board games, and some examples of great transparency you'll see in them. Here's Memoir 44, and these are the dice you roll when you attack in that game, rolling dice for combat is fairly common in board games, but they did this really great thing where they have these custom dice, and you see what happens very directly. You roll a soldier, that means a soldier dies. You roll a tank, that means a tank dies. You roll a flag, that means it's a retreat. You're not looking up the results on some combat results table somewhere in the rule book. You see the results right in front of you. Here's the cube tower in Shogun. And this is sort of how they do their battle system, where if two sides are attacking, one side picks up their yellow cubes, which represents their army, and the other guy picks up their blue cubes, and they both sort of toss them into the tower, and whichever one has the most cubes come out is the winner. But the kind of the interesting thing here is that cubes also will stay in the tower for later in the game, and so. You may have lost a battle earlier, but you've got a bunch of cubes in the tower, so you might do better in the next battle. And so that's a very interesting system, but it's actually very easy for a player to understand because they get that physical idea that I remember I dropped these physical wooden cubes in this tower and it's still in there somewhere. It's a very easy thing for someone to grasp instead of having to come up with sort of a complicated rule system where they're recording a bunch of things and okay, I did this X turns ago, so that changes my probability, in the future. This is just a very direct system. And this is the supply-demand tract in Power Grid, which is just an incredible piece of design work. In that game, you have power plants, and you fuel them with coal, with oil, with uranium, with garbage, and you see that's what these little wooden cubes are. And when the game starts, that track is filled all the way to the bottom. And as players, buy coal or they, buy oil, they pick it up from the track. And the price of the item is just, I don't know if you can see it on the slide, but on the bottom there, the very bottom, it says 1, and then the one above it says 2, and then the one above it says 3. So as you pick up the items from the track, the price is going to naturally increase. And that's this very easy to understand representation of supply and demand. Because if everyone in the game is buying up oil, all that oil is going to disappear, and it's going to have a very high value. And people just see that immediately. They don't have to be writing stuff down or keeping track of things. It just happens right there directly on the board. Here's Agricola. They have the resource piles. So every turn, if someone is not grabbing something from the wood pile or the clay pile, it just starts to pile up. And people get this very clear physical thing in front of them that draws the player's attention. So they get the sense of wow, there's a lot of wood sitting there. Maybe that's something I should take advantage of, even if that doesn't fit into my strategy. And the important thing here is that the rules that they see executed in front of them are also playing out in their head. Which makes them engaged in the game. They are understanding what's going on, so they're able to play out how the game can continue functioning. The game is not existing inside the computer, it's existing inside the player's head. And the same should be true for strategy games. Even though it's a video game, even though all of the calculations can happen inside the computer, it's very important that you understand the most important thing is what's going on inside a player's head, that they're able to understand the rules and they're able to think through them. And so, because of that, for me, transparency is the key factor that enables strategy in these type of games. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm beginning to see a pattern emerge. So why don't we go through, we'll hear from the other two speakers and then we'll have a conversation. So our next speaker is Keith Burgun. I met Keith for the first time at Practice. I think it was 2 years ago when we were at the party, and I started having an animated conversation with you. We were going back and forth, and then I noticed a little dinosaur on your badge. I was like, wait a minute, Dino Farm Games. Oh, you're the guy that made 100 Rogues. So. Yeah, I love that game. 100 Rogues is a roguelike for the iPhone. And at the time, one of the really the best examples of this kind of like contemporary renaissance of the roguelike on this new platform. He has also worked on a game called Oro. And then just recently was the game designer on a wonderful game called Empire, which you should also get on your iPhone device. And he's also the author of a book on game design called Game Design Theory, a new philosophy for understanding games. So he's thought a lot about the kind of formal structure of games, and I think that influences design practice. So please welcome Keith Burgun.
Hi. All right. Everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. That's not the first slide. This is the first slide. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Keith, and my talk is called Systems and Sauces, and it is moving on its own. So let's just do this. Let's do that. Okay. These are two concepts that I want to kind of get across about game design, it sort of expresses my philosophy, and I'll go into some of the games I've worked on and talk about how they apply there and stuff. But basically, first I want to start by giving you like a metaphor of or this little story of going into this really fancy restaurant. It looks beautiful, and everyone tells you this restaurant's really awesome, and you go and you sit down, and there's this bowl of soup that everyone talks about, and it's supposed to be this like really great bowl of soup, and in reality, the bowl of soup is actually just tomato sauce that was just a bowl full of tomato sauce and nothing else. But because of the presentation and everything, it might be a while before you realize that. You might eat half the soup before you realize that that's the case. You might never realize that that's the case. You might think, oh, it was just, it was kind of weird soup, but, it was, So that's just like this little story that I want to start with, and then I want to get into what I want to talk about, which is, my whole goal with game design is to deliver value as quickly and efficiently as possible to players. I feel like if players give you like 5 minutes, that's like a huge gift, and you owe it to them to like make sure that 5 minutes is like totally, completely rewarded, and not at all like you don't want to waste their time. It's the last thing in the world you want to do. So how do we do that? We've already talked about interesting decisions. Actually, everyone's been talking about, and yeah, I agree. And interesting decisions are the primary producer of value in strategy games. So, and let me talk about what interesting decisions are. So I have these are sort of prescriptive terms: solution and guess. So a solution is something that you know 100% of the information that you need to know to make this choice, and when you make it, it's like there's no better answer. That's like the best thing that you could possibly do. Whereas a guess is something, it's like I see it as on the other side, and that's like you have zero or close to zero of the information you need to make the choice, and so it's just an arbitrary choice. And neither of those I consider interesting decisions. Examples, I pressed the wrong button. Examples of solutions are, putting a square peg in a square hole. There's nothing, if that's the task, there's no choice to be made, you do it. Lighting the 4 torches, I think there's already some talk about that a little bit. Using fire on an ice monster, hard counters actually tend to be solutions. I mean, if you can do that, you do that. There's no better thing to do. Press X to behead enemy stripper. That's just like sort of like a QTE kind of example where you need to get past this part. We need you to do this little piece of labor in order to get past this part, and that's like there's nothing better you can do than that. So. Guesses, on the other hand, are like choose from 2 identical paths. So like show you 2 doors, 2 red doors or something. And so you have these 2 doors, and you have to choose from them. And so you're like, I don't know, and you just choose arbitrarily. And so I would consider that also not a interesting decision. In fact, I don't even call that a decision. I call that a guess. And I don't call the things on the left, the solutions, I don't call those decisions either. I use the word decision for things that are in the middle, which I'll get to. Playing 1 round of rock, paper, scissors is also a guess, the first round. You have nothing to go off of. After the first round, you could argue that you have a little bit of like, okay, well, I'm gonna like read a pattern or whatever. But on the first round, it's certainly just a guess. Choosing +1 attack or +1 defense. This is kind of an interesting one because you can kind of this could actually be in either category. Or if you ask a person in the beginning of a game, like, do you want the guy who does more damage or the guy who takes less damage? It's kind of like, well, they're equal. I don't know how am I supposed to choose that? Whereas later, if it's asked later in the game, a lot of times it's an obvious choice. So like, if you're a DPS guy, a guy who deals damage, you have that like already going, that strategy going. Then obviously the +1 attack is better. So in that case, it would be a solution. Guessing whether you'll roll a hit, like, and there are things that can factor into that. But a lot of times that will kind of like, it's like, it's like, let's say I have a 90% chance. Well, okay, I'm gonna just guess that I am gonna hit this person, And then in the middle you have decisions. And the way I describe decisions are they're interesting decisions are like on the razor's edge between what we can and cannot understand. So like, the things on the left are the things that we perfectly understand. Things on the right are things we don't understand at all. And then things right in the middle, like the perfect thing is where it's like right between where you can and cannot understand it. And when that's the case, that's like really optimal. That's what we want to present to people. So there's this concept of like, so if interesting decisions are the source of value in games, then I want to minimize everything else. And that means, that doesn't mean remove everything else. It just means minimize everything else. And achieve elegance through determining a core mechanism. Core mechanism is like really important. I don't think I've certainly heard somebody talk about it, but I don't hear people talk about it often enough. The idea of having a game that's built around a core mechanism. And so ultimately what that leads to, you have a core mechanism. Well, I'll give you some examples of core mechanisms. Like Mario Brothers, the jump is the core mechanism. You do everything. You get over platforms. You get over hazards. You kill monsters. You unlock things. You break bricks. You do everything with jumps in Mario, and that's the core mechanism of Mario. And in Smash Brothers, the core mechanism is a little bit like more. A little looser, but it's like Smash Bros. 64, the core mechanism is movement, or like positioning. And everything that you do either changes your positioning or changes the positioning of the opponent. So like an attack will change the positioning of the opponent. A jump will obviously change your position. And then there's like a supporting mechanism in Smash Brothers of like the damage percentage, which changes how much you're knocked back when you're hit. So that supports that core mechanism. Also the goal, you want a goal that supports your core mechanism. So the goal in Smash Brothers is knock people out. It like is a logical goal that relates to that core mechanism. And a theme and a metaphor that explains your core mechanism clearly. And ultimately, what you're doing with this is you're building a gameplay system that's coherent. It's a system. And the big point I want to make here is that a lot of games aren't systems. They're actually a collection of like semi-related little like mini half systems. But what I'm saying is when you create one big tight gameplay system that everything is like pointing to this central core mechanism, to this, then you can get this like really, that's the way that you can build interesting decisions. So anyway, on to my stuff. This is 100 Rogues, and in 2008 I started designing this, and it's just a roguelike. It's like, it's a pretty normal roguelike in a lot of ways. I wanted to like boil stuff down, but I didn't have a clear idea of how to do that exactly. And so what I did was I kind of took the roguelike model, and this is what I think a lot of people do. They'll start with like a genre, and they'll kind of like from the top down kind of like tweak stuff, maybe remove some stuff, maybe add some stuff. That seems to be the general normal way to do things, and that's how I did things for this. And so I sort of wanted to add tactics to the roguelike design, like the roguelike kit of design. I don't know if everyone probably knows what roguelikes are, right? Yeah, like I used to have to explain that, but not anymore. Just kind of cool. If I wanted to boil down, let's say I wanted to boil this down, boil down roguelikes, I have to look at like, well, okay, what are they? And there are a lot of things, but there isn't a core mechanism that you can really boil down to. Like the roguelikes do have tactics, like chess-like moving around on a grid type tactics, but it's like incidental when that happens. It's not planned to be like that. 90% of interactions in roguelikes, and this gets to my efficiency point, 90% of interactions in roguelikes are like, okay, I'm standing here, there's a monster one tile away from me, I'm gonna like skip turn, so he walks up to me, I hit him, he hits me, I hit him, and he dies. Like that explains like 90% of the tactical choices that you make in roguelikes. And they're like I said, they're not really choices, they're obvious, they're solved. or they're guesses a lot of times with like random dice rolls and stuff. And so. And then what's it called? Resource management. That's another good example. You know how you have these like all these items in your inventory, and it's like, oh man, there's so much, like that must mean I have like so many choices to make because I have all these items. But no, really, it's like you have your +1 sword, you find a +2 sword, you equip it. Like you just equip the better stuff in terms of equipment. And then in terms of like consumables, the rule for consumables is very simple. Do you need to use this consumable right now, or else you'll die? And if the answer is yes, then you use it. And if the answer is no, then you do not use it. There's this old joke, I don't remember, maybe somebody remembers it better than me, but there was like an old joke of like a guy fighting a giant crab monster, and he's got like rocket launchers and all the weapons like that you would have in a video game. He's got them all strapped to him, but he's like shooting it with like a slingshot or something because he doesn't want to waste any resources in case there's an even bigger crab monster later. And so that's my point, is that resource management is not there's not a source of, it's not a system, it's not a source of interesting decisions in roguelikes. And then there's exploration, and you're exploring this randomly generated dungeon and stuff. But really, it's what's so funny is that Dungeon Crawl is this roguelike that you mentioned you played, and it has auto explore. There's a button, you press O on the keyboard, and it'll automatically explore for you. It's just like, and it does it like really efficiently. And once you know about auto explore, you'll never not use auto explore because it's like totally dead, and it's just wasting less of your time. And that's a good example of like what I mean by wasting people's time in ways that aren't obvious. Like when you're walking around and moving, you think I'm making choices and I'm doing things that matter, but you're really not, because there's no system there to like to make the choices interesting. So anyway, that's what with 100 Rogues I tried to like add tactics, but really roguelikes, that you can't just like add interesting decisions to a system. Interesting decisions are like a property of a really strongly built system. Also, roguelikes can't really be boiled down much more than this. I boiled them down a little bit, and they could be boiled down a little more, but really anything that's more boiled down than this is a new thing. Actually, Michael Brogg, did I pronounce your name right? Bro. Like you're my bro? Yeah. Okay, cool, I didn't know that. He does similar stuff, but like, Zaga 33, for example, like that's a really cool game, but like he really just created a new system. Like it looks a little bit like a roguelike and stuff, and it has some of the surface level stuff, but it's really its own system. It's a new system. And that's the only way that you can boil down roguelikes any more than this, really. So my next game that I've been working on for 2 years, and I would actually love to set it up here so that people can play it. I have it, but with this, I basically was trying to do that. I was trying to boil down roguelikes, and I was boiling and taking out things and removing things, and I kept doing that. And then eventually I realized there's nothing here. I boiled off all the stuff, and there was nothing left. So I had to create something basically from scratch. I mean, the only things that are still existing from roguelikes in this are you have a single actor moving on a grid, and permadeath, which really just means you can win or lose. So I mean, really, but anyway. So the core mechanism in this is, I call it bumping, and it's basically movement. It's like pushing. Your basic attack, you have a basic attack when you click on monsters, and it doesn't damage them at all. It just knocks them back one tile. And so it's pretty inefficient at killing people. The object of the game is to kill lots of monsters really quickly and get high scores. Okay, that's the object of the game. And the way to do that, though, you don't have your basic attack doesn't deal damage, so you have to knock monsters back. And as you see, the maps are kind of surrounded by water. That's one of the supporting mechanisms of the core mechanism, where you knock a monster back, and if he falls into the water, he dies. And then you have these other supporting mechanisms, which are the spells on the bottom of the screen. So you have a wind spell, and it creates these wind currents. And if you create these wind currents and you knock a monster into the wind current, he'll bounce. And that can have all other kinds of ramifications, like what happens when he bounces, and he can bounce back. And see the squid on the far left? He'll sometimes if you knock two monsters into the same tile of water, he'll come up and he'll throw monsters back that you knock onto him. So everything, all the monsters have tactical abilities. Your things are all tactical. You can create this ice in the middle there, that icy area, and you knock a monster on that, and he slides all the way across it. You can set up fire traps, and it's all tactical. But anyway, my point is that I had to create this system from scratch because that's really what I like advocate. And then Empire, which is the game that just got released, is like I was looking at the 4X games, the 4X strategy games like Civilization, Master of Magic, Master of Orion, those games, and I was like, I want to boil those down, and I kind of had the same experience. I tried to like boil them down really, and you kind of can't boil them down too much more than they are as they are. So when you do that, you eventually reach a point where you're like, well, what is the core mechanism? I actually, maybe someone else could answer it. Maybe Soren could answer this. What's the core mechanism of Civilization? I don't really know, and I play a lot of Civ. I love Civ, but I don't know what the core mechanism is, and that's why I don't know how to like make it more efficient. So what I did here was I came up with a new core mechanism, which is just managing diminishing resources. So like in this game, you set up these little cities, but they absorb like resources from the land, like in Civ, but it actually drains the resources from the land. And so you're actually damaging and destroying all the land as you go. And so obviously there's a diminishing resource there. And then also you have this, if anyone's played like card games like Dominion or Ascension, there's like a card game tactical element where you have a deck building mechanism. And if anyone's played deck building games, your deck is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes. And what that means is with each new card, it actually has like less value than the previous card that you put in because it's being put into a larger pool. And so in either way, they all sort of support this concept of like managing a diminishing resource. So that's that. All right, so boiling down, and this comes back to my like soup metaphor. Basically, when you're boiling something down, you're increasing the density of something, and I think that's really important in terms of like creating something for someone. In terms of, you're giving me a moment of your time to like hear what I have to say and see what I'm capable of making or whatever, and like so I owe you the highest possible density of like quality and whatever like value. So sauces, on the other hand, are like there to sort of obfuscate the lack of a system. That's the way that I really see it. Some of the most common ones, like mass content, having tons and tons and tons of stuff. That's a really great way because then it's like it takes longer for people to realize that there isn't a system there because there's all this stuff for them to look into and check out. And so like it takes them. Sometimes they have to check out all the stuff a few times, and then they're like, somewhere in their brain, they're like, okay, there isn't really a thing here. So, the good examples of that are like, collectible card games or things that just have tons and tons of content. I tend to call it iron lung game design because they're games that just need a constant flow of new content or else they'll die. They create the appearance of being alive. It's more like a zombie or something. Labor. A good example, like I talked about, square peg and square hole, right? Well, okay, let's say I say, here's a square peg and the hole is like down the hall. And you gotta like run down there and and then go put it in. It can kind of like seem like you did something. It kind of like seems a little more like there's something going on there. For example, another great example I've never heard anybody talk about is Monopoly. The money in Monopoly, Monopoly has like almost no decisions if you play like the normal sort of way that most people play. There's almost no choices to be made, but like one of the things that obfuscates that is the fact that they have this money with this denomination system. So it's like, oh, I need like $322 or something, and it's like, oh, here's a 500, and they like break it up and like giving all these different bills, and that feels like you're doing something. In those moments, like I just realized like how much time and mental energy is spent breaking bills in Monopoly. It's like that's like the core mechanism of it almost. So there's labor, spectacle, like just seeing, this huge vista, or like thousands of units are coming at me, like things like that, like where it's like something spectacular, and that can kind of like also distract you in the way that like that restaurant and the fancy bowl that the soup came in and stuff like that can distract you. And then high execution and high randomness. This is a contentious one, but to me, when you're talking about decisions, you're talking about questions of should I do this or should I do that, not can. Can is a different question. And so if there's a question as to whether you can even do something, it can't really be an option in your should category. So like a good example is like tic-tac-toe. If you and I were to play tic-tac-toe, it would be obviously solved. We'd like come to a draw. But if we were to play and there's like a 30% chance anytime you lay down an X or an O that you skip your turn, then you can start to see how that it starts to make it look like there's something going on in tic-tac-toe, even when there isn't. And I actually apply this to like war games too, like big, dice roll, those dicey war games too, where you have like this grid of all these units, and they have all these units and stuff, and you like do some strategy, and it works because the dice rolls worked out, or maybe it doesn't work because the dice rolls didn't work out. But if you didn't have those dice rolls, this would actually, it's not that complex that you can't just solve it and like come up with like an optimal strategy like pretty quickly. So those kind of things I see them as like sort of obfuscating the lack of a system. And so yeah, the substance in your soup of your game is a system, a contest of decision making, and a system that like that's coherent and that has all the parts are important. So it's not just like, oh, there's dice rolling and there's like running down corridors and there's like this and then there's like this, like a bunch of different not really related things. Instead, you have this one system and everything points to that one thing. And that's a really efficient way to create something that can live forever, like an evergreen game that can like just last and can keep going on and live forever. Whereas other things, it's like you can only sort of like trick people so long until they'll figure out that there's no system there. And that's my talk.
Nice. Thank you. It's simple. Either the choice is simple. It's a zombie in an iron lung, or living forever. Which one do you want? It's so simple. All right. So our third speaker is Brad Muir. Brad Muir works at I think one of the places that is I don't know, kind of an ideal. It seems like such a great studio. Double Fine seems like such a great place to work.
It
seems like it, but in reality, it's not. So you worked on Psychonauts. Iron Brigade. You worked on what's it called? The heavy metal game, Brutal Legend. And then just recently, you are the lead designer on a game that was successfully kickstarted.
Yeah, you're totally aping my talk right now.
So I'm just gonna throw it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Brad Muir.
Thanks. Jake, did I do this right?
Yeah.
Okay, as long as it looks okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start this now. Thanks for having me, too. This is cool. Hey, I work in Double Fine. I'm Brad. So, yeah, as Frank was stealing my intro here, these are the games that I've worked on. If you've ever played Alter Echo, I'll totally buy you a drink. Yeah, and then I was totally going to do Soren's talk, but Civilization, I forgot to design that game, so I'm going to give this one instead. So my current project is called Massive Chalice. So if you've not heard about this, so it's a tactical strategy game on an epic timeline. So you as the player are going to take over this role of this immortal ruler that's kind of like managing this kingdom. And it's under invasion by this weird demonic force called the Cadence. So you're gonna fight these demonic creatures on like a tactical human scale, kind of small scale, intimate battlefields. And then the other half of the game is that you're gonna come back to the strategy layer where you'll be managing the entire kingdom. What's going on with the projector? Are we okay? Jared? Yeah. You okay? Yeah. All right. Oh, okay, cool. And here you're going to be like making all sorts of like strategic decisions, like how you're going to be spending your resources and what kind of technology you're going to research, things like that. But one of the most important things you're going to do is about the Cadence. They only attack every about 5 to 10 years, and your heroes, they will age over the course of the timeline. So it's a very reactionary, defensive kind of design on the strategy side. And your heroes are going to grow old and die over the course of this. So you need to be retiring them and then marrying them together so that they can have children, and then those children will grow up, and then they will help you defend the kingdom in the future. So these are the games that I really love on the strategy side that I'm using as kind of like the basis of this. So XCOM Old and New, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Fire Emblem. I love all those games, and I think they're great. My design goals for the game, I really want to make sure that there's like a high degree of character attachment through the mechanics of the game. I think this is something that XCOM does incredibly well. Like all of your soldiers in XCOM are just kind of these generic faceless. They have faces. That would be gross. They have faces, but they're just these kind of like generic characters, and they come with random names and whatever. And some people rename their characters, but like I never do. I kind of like getting this random assortment of soldiers, and it's like, okay, these are the men and women of XCOM that I'm directing. And I end up getting like super attached to them, and there's no real like story content, narrative content based around them, but like they're way more important to me than the actual narrative of the game, and I think it's awesome. Also, they die. Like sometimes you screw up and make bad decisions, and they die, and then you feel bad. And so I really want to make sure that happens, because a lot of people that I guess I want to make you feel bad. Nice, good game design. So. A lot of people, when they play XCOM, though, like they get so attached to their soldiers, and a lot of times they'll like rename them after their friends, and then their friends die because of something they did, and they just reload it. Like they refuse to really embrace this concept of permadeath. So with Massive Chalice, I really want to make sure, like through this aging system, like you don't have to play it on Iron Man. You don't have to deal with combat deaths. I'd like it if you did, but you're still gonna have to deal with these heroes like growing old and dying, and I just kind of want to like ease people into that concept if possible, because I think it's awesome. Also, the generational component of the game, I really want it to inspire like self-reflection in players. I'm getting older. I'm gonna get married. My fiance is in the audience. Hey. And thinking about having kids, and like and my parents are growing older. There are all these things that like I'm thinking about as a like mid-30s human, and like I kind of like I don't want it to have like a ham-fisted lesson or whatever. I just want it to be like about people growing old and dying, and make people think about their own mortality. And this is awesome when I put it this way. Tim Schafer's awesome. I worked for that guy for a long time, and he's really good at like putting this into positive things. But I always forget how he describes it, and then I just lean into mortality and futility. That's what the game's about. Also want to make an original fantasy world, so no orcs, elves, or dragons, and yeah. Who is sad? Did you just, did you? Oh my God, all right. We did a Kickstarter for it. If you haven't seen the video I get vomited on, that's on the internet. You should go look at it. So we raised some money, and that's cool. And at Double Fine, we're trying out this like open development concept, because like our community supports us. They're really awesome, and we want to try to like, I don't know, connect with them as much as possible. So through forums and our blog, we do a team stream every 2 weeks, showing the game at every step of the way, like keeping people informed of like what the hell we're doing. It's really weird and painful to show the game super early, but I think it's cool and educational for people, and hopefully inspirational for people, that you see how shitty a video game is early in development, and then midway through development, and then near the end of the development, and then it becomes good all of a sudden. So at least that's what we hope. And we also, Two Player Productions, they're a great documentary crew. They're doing a bunch of behind-the-scenes stuff that's going to be coming. It's going to be really cool. So we start showing the game when it looks like this. And then it looks like this, and then it's still pretty early. This is where we are right now. We're kind of just coming out of pre-production, and you should come look at it. Design in the open is like super weird. Like this process has been very strange for me, and like I said, it's kind of painful for the team. We get tons and tons of feedback, and it's like difficult to sort all this stuff out. Like we just have a bunch of people making comments on our forums, and in the Twitch chat, and all this stuff, and it's kind of hard. And I do spend a lot of time wondering if we're like dealing with vocal minorities. I know there are a lot of people that like backed our Kickstarter, and then they're just like, shut up, like stop sending me updates, like just give me the game when it's done. That's it. I don't care. But like I really want this feedback, because like we're making this game, especially because we use Kickstarter, like we're making it for our community specifically. Like, these are people that already paid for the game. I do think that there's this weird thing with Kickstarter where you could actually run into a sort of like local maxima situation. I just put this in here because I really wanted to sound smart like these guys. And I was like, oh God, giving a talk at NYU, I have to have like a 3D height graph in my presentation. But like, like if you're here in your design and you're like, okay, this is kind of what we're thinking, and we're really early on and we're sharing it with the community, and they say like, yeah, like keep going that way, that's cool. You might only end up here, and what you really want to do is sort of like end up here. So I think this is like, and I feel like this graph and the whole local maxima thing was really about, like I heard people talking about it with data-driven design and like Zynga Facebook kind of stuff, that it's like, this is like the trap of data-driven design. And that's usually just based on money, and it's a lot of other stuff. But I do think when you're just dealing with feedback from your community, it's the same kind of thing. Like that positive feedback can actually take you towards local maxima. But like I don't think it's always bad to like ignore your community. Like we're making the game for them, and so I wanted to quickly go through this case study where we really did like listen to the community and take their negative feedback under advisement and stuff. And so there's this system in Massive Chalice, the way I've envisioned it, it's called Relics, and it's really meant to be this this consolation prize for embracing the permadeath of the game. So when one of your heroes croaks, if they were good enough, if they were like heroic enough and gain enough experience throughout their life, they will actually become a relic. And this was just, and then this relic, so like these glasses and this like Viking helmet, this came straight out of the Kickstarter video because we didn't really know what it was going to be. So it's like, yeah, this Viking helmet and these glasses can then be like equipped by a member of that bloodline. So anyone like the children or the brother of this character can actually use this stuff, and it would like power them up somehow. So we talked about what we wanted for the system internally, and really wanted to avoid the design space of like researched equipment. The game is really based on XCOM, the way that you research new stuff and then you unlock new equipment for your heroes and stuff. And I love that, and I wanted the weapons to be part of that. So it's like, yeah, relics shouldn't be weapons. And can we make them an avenue for these ancestor attacks? So this was like the initial piece of artwork that we had for the game when we pitched it. And like, is there a way that we can actually have these ancestor attacks be linked to this relic system? Because like this is a really cool visual way of like showing this character being empowered by his ancestors and stuff. And we affectionately refer to this as ghost dad attacks. So we came up with the system. John Bernhelm, my designer on this project, is amazing, and I really lean on him, and we worked together on this design, and we came up with this thing that was great, where essentially the relics are just these pips, and then the individual heroes have like a talent tree that you would expect kind of from like a fantasy RPG. And what you can do is like take these relics that are from your parents or your grandparents, and you can drag and drop them into your the abilities that you've kind of selected in your talent tree, and it will like turn them into these ancestor attacks, into these ghost dad attacks. I was like, fuck, that's awesome. And then also, like, I love these Catholic relics. I found these things, like, and this is just sometimes it happens where you use a word and then you Google the word and you're like, that's cooler than whatever the hell I was thinking. It's really sweet. So there are these Catholic relics that are like actually like bones. Like the one in the middle is like a dude's leg. It's like his leg bone and skulls and like these cool things. I even found one of like a guy holding a chalice. I'm like, that's it. We have to use this. This is great. So we took it to the backers and explained this relic system to them. And we're like, we do this team stream, and it's like us sitting on the couch, like being dumb and like talking about the game, and then getting feedback from the Twitch stream. It's really fun, I guess, because I don't know. I think I'm learning that I'm a big attention whore, and this is just like an outlet for that, I guess. But then like, I'm all excited to read the forums, and there's this thread that's like, it's like relics massive enough. So like, Mr. Stimson 38, he just did not like our design. What? Oh, Mrs. Timpson. It could be Mrs. Timpson. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. It's my fiance heckling me. Yeah. I love you. You're awesome. So like, and like this thread, so a lot of like how we sort through this feedback is, a lot of it is just qualitative, like reading these threads and like I don't know, and I feel like if it's like 51% positive, I feel like we're fucking killing it, like, oh, it's awesome, because like I know that we can't make everybody happy and we have to design this game for ourselves, but like this thread, it like made no one happy. Like and there were people that like they're like, yeah, I lurk, but I posted here about this topic because I think it's terrible, and like we had this kind of like come to Jesus meeting where we were like I was like, no, like this system is so elegant and I love it, and it's the best, it's so beautiful, and it's orthogonal to the research system, and it's the best thing, but like it just makes everybody not happy. So we talked about how to redesign it. And so we thought about it a lot, and we decided that we would just like fully lean into that flavor, because it's really the flavor that people want. It's a sauce, if you will, of that of the generational weapons. The fact that like there's Aragorn with his sword, and it's like, oh, the sword has a name that I can't remember. It also starts with an A. Anybody know it? There you go. I can't say that. I'm not gonna pretend that I know what that is, but it's like really cool and in massive. Okay, so this is Fantasy games, cool. So like, and this was something that like even though we didn't even explicitly say it in our pitch for the game, it was something that people like envisioned and they like latched onto it and they're like, and in some cases that's like why people back the game. So like I really want to make sure that we can try, if we can, to do that. So we're like, okay, what if the human weapons are the relics? So if when somebody dies, if their weapon has gained enough XP over the course of that, when they die, that weapon will actually become this relic, and then the relics can continue like leveling up. And again, they're bound to they're bound by blood, like they can only be passed down to children or brothers and sisters, things like that. And then also like to try to make the decision a little bit more interesting, I want to try to have this relic bound to a hero for his or her entire lifetime. So even when you retire them from the battlefield, like they will take that relic with them, and you'll have to kind of like wait for them to die before it can be passed down. And like all this stuff is rough. I guess that's the other thing, is that we have to be really confident or really comfortable with messing up in front of everybody, because this idea, it might be fucking terrible. I don't know. So we'll see. But I think it's a way that that we can solve this problem and make people happy and have that flavor and still not like completely wreck our game design. It also leaves the door open for still leaving the door open for lots of research options. Like, so the human weapons would not be in the research tree, but there's still all these things like the demonic weapons, the armor upgrades, items. We can still have all these things in the research system. So even though they are encroaching on each other a little bit, like I think it's okay for there to be a little bit of overlap between those. Also, like, how do we keep Ghostad? Because the Ghostad thing is awesome, and I think a lot of fantasy games, like critical hits are this weird non-contextualized thing. It's just like a die roll. But we were like, okay, like what if the critical hits would be the ancestor attacks? So normal weapons can't do critical hits, but then these relic weapons can, and when you do get a critical hit, that's when your ancestors show up and help you out, and that's like kind of why you're doing more damage. I think it's going to be cool. I don't really know. We'll see. Really though, the takeaways from this rambling talk about this new game, I think just like don't get too attached to your beautiful things. I think especially like, I don't know, when you're in school, like there's kind of the search for elegance, and I don't know, like it's tough because I think making something just a little bit inelegant is okay, and you can work hard to sort of, I don't know. Yeah, just don't be too tied to the fact that like everything has to be like super streamlined and elegant in your design, because I think it can put you into some weird situations. Also remember your audience, like just the people, especially like, with this Kickstarted thing, it's like I think we always make games for the people who play them, not just ourselves. And I think going through this Kickstarter thing was like a real kind of kick in the pants about like, oh yeah, no, like these are actually the people that we actually make this game for, and it's cool to, just to have that reminder all the time. Also, like, obey the rule of cool. Like, this is just like a weird thing, and this really ties into the inelegant stuff. Like, sometimes something is just like fucking cooler, man. Like it just makes the game better as an experience, and it's cool how it ties into what you were saying, Keith, about like I feel like Double Fine is kind of a sauce-based company, and I'm more of a mechanics designer, but I do think there's a lot of value in the sauce, and just. Don't just make that the best tomato soup ever. Like make sure that you're putting some sauce in there so that you can have stuff that like is really memorable about your game. Like don't cut the heart out of your game in search of like elegance and like streamlining everything, because then you'll just have something that's like kind of boring and uninteresting. That's it. Thanks.
Nice.
Thanks
All right, Brad Muir. So grab the mic. Brad, grab that mic and bring it with you. Guys, make sure that your mics work. Could you just give me my mic check real quick? Pop your mics and boom. There you go. Yours works. And Soren, just double check, make sure. I want to pick up on that thought real quick. We're gonna have a little lightning round discussion, then we're gonna open it up for Q&A. Keith had this thing that I thought was really wonderful. There's a kind of a moral obligation of the designer to the player, which I thought was beautiful. That you talked about the players giving the gift of their time and attention, and that you have this responsibility to give them this thing that's as good as it can possibly be to deliver value. But then also then at the same time, I'm thinking about the open process here and the tension between you and Mrs. Timpson. And it's weird, like Keith. I mean, are you? It's like the thing that you're delivering to them, it's not clear that that's what necessarily people want. You know what I mean? Like you're delivering the thing that you want. Like it's the most dense value in, according to like how you think about games. And yet at the same time, you could also frame it as a kind of moral responsibility to lead the player towards wanting better things. You know what I mean? Like maybe if I come into the restaurant with a taste for that could be elevated by the thing I'm being served, but made better. So it's just a complicated series. Like sometimes I feel like we're searching through this iterative process for the right thing, and sometimes I feel like there is an ideal that we have that we're imposing on other people. So I just want to ask you guys to pick up on that theme and talk a little bit more about the moral responsibility we have as designers. Is there something there to kind of push players towards interesting decisions as opposed to just activities that they might enjoy?
The first thing that you asked was, are you giving them like just what you think is good? And I would say that's the case for any game designer ever, who ultimately you're the guy making the choices, or the girl making the choices of what is going to be in this game, right? So like ultimately it's going to come down to your opinion as to what is the best thing. Now, there's listening to feedback and hearing arguments from other people as to like, no, that's not the best thing because X, Y, Z. That's super important, as it is in anything else. But I mean, ultimately it's going to come down to your choice and your decision, and I may be wrong about something. I'm like that. That's the thing, is I kind of believe like for any given core experience that you want to make, like or any claim or whatever. But if you want to make a game, like you have some like idea for a game experience that you want to create, and then like from there are some like more optimal ways of going about that. And like, you can help find those more optimal ways by talking to more people, the same way that you would explore any other topic. Doing research, talking to people, hearing people, thinking about it yourself, making little charts and doing whatever you need to do. But like, pursue the best possible way to do whatever it is you need to do.
I think it's interesting because there is a sense of like what you want to accomplish as a designer when you're making a game, and I think it's absolutely fine to have that approach, because that's just inherent to being a person and designing a game. But the thing is, you'll never understand your game as well as the connective knowledge of your player base. So a lot of what this perhaps difference here is that you know what you want to accomplish, but you don't really know if what you've built actually accomplishes that until you like really find out, what players are doing with it and all the things they're doing that are unexpected.
Right.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is hard, right?
I don't know if I have much to add to it. It's like all this stuff, there are tons of forum topics about massive chalice, and we're just like, I don't know. Like, no.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to do that. It's like.
Well, but you should have a reason too. Like you
Yes.
should have an explanation, I think, consciously for like why not that,
Yeah, and it's good to like go back and forth with them and like hear it out and stuff like that. But yeah, I think there is, having a strong vision, making sure that like you're the one creating the thing I think it's really, really important for the creation of the stuff. And hopefully it's like players don't necessarily know what they want until you kind of show it to them.
Yeah.
Like I think that is like a real thing that happens all over the place. Like just making sure that you are the one coming up with new stuff and then surprising people and then having them be excited by it.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So in the realm of strategy games, where decisions and choices are paramount and so important, it often occurs to me so board games are a great reference point. You brought them up. You talked about them. This idea of transparency. It seems to me that one of the things that board games have, and we're kind of living in a wonderful era of board game innovation. We're going to hear from Rob Davio later on. Quentin Smith is here. There's like this incredible sense of creativity that's happening in the world of board games, and one of the things that they have, I struggled with in making games for Facebook, and Soren, you were in the same position, making a strategy game for Facebook. On one level, it seems like Facebook is the perfect place to make a new kind of board game. There are games that are they're social, they're multiplayer, there are lots of resource management. There's a kind of abstract token exchange that almost looks like a board game, and they're. At the same time, what I struggled with was the thing that board games do so well is that they have an ending. And the ending is tonight. It's going to be an hour from now. And in an hour from now, one of us is going to stand up and cheer, and the rest of us are going to be kind of deflated. And that moment trickles back in time and informs everything we did up to that point. every little choice, every little decision, every little action you took was leading up to that moment. That's what Facebook doesn't have. That's what many video games don't have. It's like you're making a choice in Diablo, this really critical choice, and then maybe 6 months from now, you will see, oh, I guess I shouldn't have chosen an Amazon, you know? And so how do we, in thinking about new platforms, and using technology and creating distributed games, digital games, asynchronous games, which seems like it's going to potentially provide us a great new platform for strategy games. How do we deal with that formal problem? Any ideas?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I've never made a Facebook game. I've thought about it and looked at it, and I guess it's like, how do you make money with that kind of game? Like, I feel like there's an inherent casualness to Facebook style stuff, and like I just feel like a lot of the kind of free-to-play models that get mapped onto those games don't really fit with like the sort of board game style thing.
But Sid Meier, the king of interesting decisions, attempted to bring Civilization into the social network kind of platform where you have asynchronous players and it kind of like over an extended period of time, and it was a real struggle for him. I think that he was dealing with the same issue, but I see it also in what I want to play games on my iPhone or my iPad that give me that board game experience, but I'm feeling like it's this lack of an ending, that lack of a tight ending that I don't know if you guys agree with me.
I think one of the issues with asynchronous play is that the longer you play a game in real time, like literally the number of days, weeks, or months you play it, the more heavily invested you're going to be in it, right? And so if you have a shorter game, it's generally losing a game is more palatable the shorter the game is, right? Going all the way down to something like Super Meat Boy, where you're going to die, 100 times in 5 minutes. It's like it's not a big deal because you're just starting right over again. But the same is true for real-time strategy games, right? That if a game, if an RTS takes 30 minutes versus one that takes 8 hours, it's a lot easier to get someone into that 30-minute experience because they know they're going to be able to play over and over again. And so asynchronous games are this really interesting format because you can play these meaty games that do have beginning and ends and have real decisions, and they can fit into people's lives. But the problem you'll see, and you see this in a game like Neptune's Pride, which is like a brilliant game, but like there's a lot of people like, wow, that was the most intense game experience of my life, and I'm never going to play the most amazing experience. I'm never going to play that game again.
I have not played that, but it was really like, listen to the Idle Thumbs guys talk about it. I was like, this sounds like the worst thing ever. It's like, apparently it's like the relationship ending, like we are not friends anymore because we played Neptune's
It's the classic example because it's probably a deep game, but who knows? How will we ever know whether Neptune's Pride is deep? Because no one plays it more than once or twice.
The question you asked, I think, is actually a question of like, how do we monetize really a small limited system that's like that's got an ending, that's like a competitive game. This is something David Sterlin's been struggling with for a while. Is like, how do you actually make? Because like you can play chess right now on Facebook. I mean, there's nothing causing Facebook to not be able to have competitive strategy games on it. The issue is, how do you make them profitable? And so like I just think that just hasn't happened yet. I mean, you could have made like a nice simple 2D version of League of Legends probably on Facebook. I don't think there's any technical reason that couldn't exist. So I think it's just that nobody has.
I think about 500 companies are trying to make that right now.
Okay, well, good. Hopefully one of them will take off, and then that'll sort of solve be the beginning of the solution to your problem. But I think it is hard to sell someone like it's. I actually think that competitive strategy games are less compatible with like business than a lot of these other models, because it's like you're selling this person, especially if you make something that's like an evergreen thing that gives you back stuff forever. It's like you're selling it to them once, and it's a complete thing. You can't break it into little parts. It wouldn't work if you broke it into little parts. And so you just have to sell them this thing, or there's other models. Some people are trying like pay for plays type of thing. That's what Sterlin's actually doing right now. And but it's an open question, I think, as to how to monetize that kind of a system. And I think that's the big reason you don't see those things on Facebook.
It's interesting that your sauce list, like one of them was like content-based stuff, and something like Magic the Gathering or whatever is, they just keep producing new expansions and new stuff. Yeah, do you consider, when you said that, like, I really like Magic the Gathering, so I guess this flavors this question, but like, do you consider that to be like one of those zombie games That like
Totally. It's the
okay.
zombie
It's
game.
I was
Magic
wondering
the
if that's
Gathering
like
is a
what you were
zombie game?
thinking
Yeah.
when you
I mean,
said
because
that.
there's not much of a system.
I mean, not what were you thinking when you said that, but
yeah.
what were you actually thinking when you
Yeah.
said that?
Not much of a system.
Yeah. If you just like, let's say you had like 10 Magic cards to play with ever or something. It's like obviously it would just be like there wouldn't be much there. You need like an influx of new content. You
Sure.
need like a lot of content, and
Yes.
I think that's
Which
exactly
is the
what
core
I'm-
mechanism of Magic. That was his guiding principle in creating it.
Right.
Well, what if you
It
had
was
tons
a
and tons
content.
of different
It was
cards?
designed to be that, and that's its own thing, and that's like
But it's a zombie. It's a shambling, living
well,
corpse.
I mean, I just think that stuff like stuff like World of Warcraft or Diablo probably does some of the stuff that Magic does, but maybe a little better by getting rid of the competitive element of it.
Okay,
Because
maybe.
I don't think inherently competition and stuff, making decisions and stuff like I don't think inherently that kind of like mass content obfuscation like noise thing is good for a competitive game. I think that it's like what I think it's what you said about like transparency. You want things to be transparent. You don't want the other guy to have some deck with like 50 cards you never even heard of before.
but
Like,
not
that's
too transparent, right? But not square peg in a square hole.
Right.
That's the ultimate
Right,
transparency.
Of course. But
So,
there's a balance always.
what do you think about this issue?
Well, to me that's not transparency. Transparency is when the rules are clear and understood, and like you can have a very complex game that's transparent, right? Like that's not necessarily the
So
same.
what's hidden in a game where the rules are simple and clear? What makes it ambiguous? What makes the choice not obvious?
Because there's just going to be a lot of factors involved, right?
So it's the size of the problem?
Yeah, it's
How do you get to that edge?
yeah. Well, there's definitely a sweet spot, right?
Yeah,
Like
how do you get there?
There's plenty of games that have so much complexity that you're just sort of lost, right? And I like to think of it literally in terms of like how many decisions am I presenting the player with? Like when you're when you first decide what to research in Civ, right? We don't want to give you 2 choices, and we don't want to give you 15 choices. We want to give you 4 or 5, right? And they need to fit into sort of neat categories, right? Like there's an economic choice, right? And there's a military choice. Maybe there's like a trading choice or an exploration type choice. As opposed to like 4 different flavors of a military choice, which is is not really important. I mean, it's tough. There's a sense. It's very telling that Blizzard has always stuck with a very limited set of units per side in their Warcraft, StarCraft games. Like if you look all throughout, from StarCraft 2 to Warcraft 3 to StarCraft to Warcraft 3 to StarCraft 2, it's always like 12 to 15 units per side, right? Like they want to have a sense that each one of the choices you're making has a very specific purpose within the game. And if they have 2 units that essentially serve the same purpose, you're just weighing the game down with more stuff that's not really helping it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I want to open it up to the audience, and we have like 5 minutes to go. So what's going on? Yes. Okay. Eric's going to ask.
I want to ask.
I'm
going
to ask Eric to ask a question of the audience to the panel.
I'm hearing. I think what's interesting. There's a lot of continuity between Warren's talk and Soren and some of Keith's talk about systems that are games that are more or less systemic.
Formalism,
There's a lot
y'all.
of grumbling in the hallway and on Twitter about this model. I want to hear from the audience. What is wrong with the model? What is wrong with this model that's being proposed? Does anyone have an answer to that? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, ultimately we're creating things that human beings will experience.
Okay, so the answer was it fetishizes the system over the experience. So if I can just unpack that a little bit, I think I understand what you're saying. It's like it becomes we're kind of worshiping the system as an object. Oh, the object has formal properties. We admire these properties, as opposed to the ineffable experience, the psychological and emotional experience of the player. So how do you respond to that?
I think that's just a much smarter thing of what I was trying to get at with like my takeaway slide with Fonzie on it and stuff, where it's like you're like that the hunt for elegance, I think is kind of goes with your like fetishization, is that a word? And yeah, I think that's like it's a dangerous place to go, like the design wankery, where you kind of go so far up your own ass in design land that it's like you're just making something that's beautiful and elegant, but like who gives a shit? Like it's not. I don't know. It's like, is it fun to play? Is it good? Is it good? Is it compelling in any way? Like, no, maybe not. So I think like, yeah, I like that. Can I steal that? All right. Also has the word fetish in it, which always like gets people excited.
I would say that so we're creating interactive systems ultimately, and people are going to be like making choices in strategy games. Let's just say strategy games for now. So we want to understand, like, sure, it's one thing to say at the end of the day, the thing is that's important is that it's fun, or that it has certain kind of experience. Okay, great. Well, how is that useful though to designers? You know, like how do I apply that? How do I need to add 10 more fun to it? You know, like you can't directly do that. So what I'm saying is this, everything I've said is in the search of fun and in the search of creating whatever kind of experience you want to make. Like, you know, that's why I talked about like a core mechanism. So basically I don't think that I'm disagreeing with you, but the thing is that this, what I'm trying to do is like say things that are like useful and applicable. You know, obviously we all want to make an experience and the experience ultimately, you know, so you can have all the reasons in the world that this should work, right? And then it just doesn't. Okay, well, there's something you missed, you know? So that's what I'm saying, like, there's reasons for why things are fun and why an experience works, and that's what we should be like pursuing, and that's something that I get a lot of pushback on, and because people are like, oh, you have all these reasons and stuff, whatever. Ultimately, all that matters is fun, or you have this certain experience. How do I get there? That's what I want to know.
I mean, to me, one of the things that makes video games so interesting is that, you know, yes, it has these game elements, but a video game is also an experience, right? And so, you know, you have some games that are very interesting. They really are pure experience, you know, something like Durester or Proteus or Gone Home or whatever. And I don't necessarily think it's... I think those two things are more orthogonal than necessarily attention. Like, you don't necessarily pull on one end and that pulls you the other way. Like, in fact, as myself as a designer, I very much feel like I want to bring people on my team that are good at working on the experience side of things, because, you know, that's not necessarily my strength as a designer. So I think that it very poorly suits your game if you're really only thinking of it in terms of rules and not, you know, the place it puts the player, you know, visually, audio, what they hear, what they see, what they feel. I mean, I think those are absolutely very, very important parts of video games.
But aren't rules massive in creating that experience?
Well, that's a different, I mean, those are also a separate type of experience, right? Like the way the rules are creates a certain atmosphere, right? Like one of the things I think is very interesting about Dota or League of Legends is their rules create a very vicious atmosphere, right? Like the way those communities are is very much a direct reflection of the way the way the game mechanics are. Of that, you know, in a game like Dota, like if you fail as a player, that's not just a neutral thing for your team, that's a negative thing for your team.
You're such a feeder, Soren. That's what I'm learning.
Such a feeder.
I'm
QQ more, Soren.
And like that's why those communities are the way they are, right? Like it's really interesting that like you know, Riot and Valve are like at the forefront of really some interesting ways to have communities police themselves. Like they're doing some really, really interesting work on that, but the problem is because of the game design at the core, right? Like if that was changed, they wouldn't necessarily have to police themselves like that, which doesn't mean they should be changing the way those games work, but like it is this kind of weird disconnect there.
But no one's willing to bite the bullet and say, no, we don't, if it's a beautiful, there's something about a beautiful, truly deep system of rules that might be profound and interesting enough to explore and create for its own sake, regardless of the kind of experience it produces. No one's willing to bite that bullet?
I think sometimes a game like Go is its own aesthetic experience because it is so stripped down. You know, it takes everything else out of your mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that has its own type of value, but that it's not that doesn't necessarily mean that's a better way to go.
And
right?
again, we're talking specifically about strategy games here. We do a certain type of game that kind of is that does seem to stretch towards that ideal of a kind of giving the player an opportunity to do what a mathematician does when confronting a little corner of mathematical problem space. You know, to really work on a deep problem that pulls them in and feels like important and profound in and of itself, regardless of whether I'm enjoying that.
I mean, you could probably do that, but like when I'm playing a game, I don't know if I want to do math. I mean, maybe I'm just dumb, but but I feel like, you know, it's like you know, it's kind of like a commercial art form, and it's like we want the games to be successful.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, but like I work in the commercial space, I guess. It's not practice.
I thought I did.
Talking about practice. But like, yeah, I thought I did. Nice. But yeah, like I don't know. It's like we want things to be, and I guess also, yeah, saying, thinking about Double Fine specifically, like I've been there a long time. Like I think it is pretty sauce based, and like we want it to be cool. We want these things to be like cool and fun and visceral and exciting and I think you can do that inside of a strategy game. And
I think you can do that in a super elegant game. Yeah. That's the thing. I think you can get those like, whoa, cool, crazy like stuff in a super elegant game. I don't think there's a dichotomy there. Also, your question about how like, what if this thing has like, these qualities just from being, it's like this abstract thing, and it's not necessarily fun, but it has something that's like appreciable. That's why I don't even use the word fun. I use the word value, and that's really what we're after, is like creating systems that have value for people. Right. And so that covers that question, doesn't it?
The definition of value is so much clearer and more obvious.
Well, it's not. No, it's broad.
It's still problematic.
I'm just saying, like whatever you make, it should have some value.
No,
for people.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
Let's just try to get 2 more questions maybe, and let's go all the way to the back. Yes, you pointing to yourself and looking around. No, the person who's confused pointing to themselves. Yes. Shout it out loud since you're in the back.
Perhaps instead of, I actually talked to Pete earlier today too, but that's similar. Perhaps instead of kind of a one versus the other thing, I think everyone gets attached to an experience in terms of aesthetic-driven design. But we think of it as a bridge between the designer and the player, and this ties into MBA mechanics, that thing. But how the designer creates the rules, which creates the dynamics and behaviors, which creates the aesthetic. And the aesthetic is what the player experiences. But to say that one disappears to the other, I think the 2 approaches are both beautiful if you equate it to music, for example. In music, you think of the message first, and express that through lyrics, and then try to create a melody and structure that, how do we create that experience the best way? How do we express that idea or message? That's the aesthetic of design. That
So-
talks about the kind of, fetishization of the rules. It should be folks in the experience. But the other direction is also something which I think ties into what Warren Spector said about emergent gameplay coming from systems, because you can, hypothetically, have experience myself, like sort of any engineer, I've also experienced the other direction, which is, here's an interesting system. What can emerge from this? What can come from this system of rules? And the excitement of that idea of like, here are these ideas of this structure that breed all these different experiences or certain kinds of experiences. How do I play with them? And you can start with a mechanical idea or a control idea.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn that into a question, and Keith, obviously, no, it's an interesting observation. I'm going to try to boil it down, Burgun style, into a question. So we've heard from Keith that he clearly starts with an idea. Like you talked about a songwriter starting with a kind of an idea and then expressing it through their lyrics. You clearly do that. Do you do that, Soren? Do you start with an idea, or do you like tinker with some things and see what happens?
Well, usually I'm starting from the basis of some specific type of strategy game, and then.
So you start with a context.
Right. This is one of these big questions for game designers in general, especially when you're talking about strategy games and board games. Are you what they would call a theme first designer or a mechanics first designer? Right. You start with an idea, like a game about railroads or the Civil War or I'm a farmer or whatever, and then you're going to make a game based off of that. Or is there this specific game mechanic idea that you want to explore, and then kind of Reiner Knizia style, you figure out later what theme to like paste on top of it. From my point of view, like the game I'm working on right now, it's codenamed Mars. It's an economic RTS, The reason why I'm interested in doing it is I love the RTS format, like a 30, 45-minute game, 2 to 8 people. But to me, like they're all essentially the same combat game right now. Like I want to make a game like that is an economic game. Instead of being like 75% military and 25% economy, I want to do it the other way around. Instead of a couple resources, there's like 13 resources in this complex resource tree. So to me, it's trying to stretch a format into a new place. Like that's how I start off. And then from there, I look at like, well, what, this is kind of like a Railroad Tycoon game, right? Like, well, what has worked in that? Now, how could I bend that to fit, sort of a more competitive short scale format?
Nice. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up. You just gave us a glimpse of what you're doing at Mohawk Game. Maybe the first public announcement of Mars. The new game from Mohawk?
We've actually talked about it a little bit.
Okay, but when's the release date? Give us a release date. No, I don't care. platforms. PS4, you heard it here.
February
Okay.
12th.
So where can people go to learn more about the stuff you're doing? Mohawk.com, Mohawkgames.com?
Mohawkgames.com.
Mohawkgames.com. You have Empire on iOS devices that people should download.
People
and
can
play.
go to my website, keithburgun.net.
KeithBurgun.net.
Hear all my weird rants.
And Brad Muir, what should people do for you? Do you just want them to leave you alone at this point, or
No. That's,
Where should they go to learn-
More the merrier.
where should they go?
MassiveChalice.com. That's that game.
MassiveChalice.com.
And then also DoubleFine.com. You
And
can go there.
DoubleFine.com.
But go to MassiveChalice.com first.
All right,
That's-
people, put your hands together for this wonderful panel. Thank you.